Hello, this is Zahil Alum. Welcome you all on Frankly Speaking. My guest today is His Excellency Robert Chatterton Dixon, Honorable British High Commissioner to Bangladesh since March 2019. He is leading across the British government's priorities in Bangladesh, and he worked in Foreign and Commonwealth Office of UK in Kabul, Chicago, Washington, Manila, Macedonia in different capacities. We welcome High Commissioner Robert Chatterton Dixon.
Very nice to be here. Thank you very much.
We are very glad that you were here at our studio today.
Thank you.
We have many issues to discuss and ask you. We will start from the coming event. You are hosting COP26, which is very important event. As a climate summit, we have a lot of issues to ask you. So this is the first thing, and some other issues related to our bilateral interests. So let us begin with climate summit, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. As a host country, what you are expecting and what makes difference from the COP25 and what is offering you, in your view, the COP26 2016?
Well, the first thing, COP26 is really important. Everywhere we look, we can see that there's a planetary emergency relating to the climate. The science is very clear that we've got to bring global emissions under control because not only have the International Panel on Climate Change, the scientists looked at the evidence, but every time we turn on the television we can see wildfires in Siberia, heat waves in Canada, cyclones in the Bay of Bengal. Everywhere around the world we can see that there's a planetary emergency. And what we want to happen at Glasgow the week after next is for the agreement that was made at Paris 5 years ago to keep world temperatures at 1.5 degrees or less below of heating. We want now to put in place the practical arrangements that will be needed to make that happen. And we think we can do it. Our Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, has summed it up as 4 key things. So it's about coal. It's about getting coal and fossil fuels out of the power generation, which we've largely done in the UK, but needs to happen on a global basis. It's about cash, which is basically the developed world who caused the problem, putting in place the financing that is needed for the developing world to be able to adapt to climate change, so climate finance. It's about cars, so it's about moving on to post-fossil fuel transport networks. And it's about trees, which is about stopping ourselves as a human species from destroying the nature which sustains the planetary environment which we all live in. And there are some really good examples here in Bangladesh of all of those things, but particularly on the trees bit, because Bangladesh has some very rich natural forests. If you look at the Sundarbans, particularly in the southwest of Bangladesh, and there you have both one of the world's biggest mangrove forests, which is a hugely efficient sink for carbon, taking carbon out of the atmosphere, but also provides a natural barrier for the cyclones coming up through the Bay of Bengal. So coal, cash, cars, trees are the 4 things that we want to do to really make a difference at Glasgow and implement the agreement that the world made in Paris 5 years ago.
Yeah, but it's a very good thing to know about the priorities that has been prioritized by your Prime Minister. But there are a lot of pledges, a lot of commitments from the global community, from the industrialized nation, and as a country like Bangladesh is very vulnerable to the consequences of climatic changes. So the promises the international community, the industrialized nations made in the earlier years, what do you think? Could they live up to their commitment, and especially in limiting the global warming?
Yes,
limiting it below 2 degrees Celsius.
Well, I think they will. I mean, the key thing about Glasgow is where the promises made at Paris need to be put into a tangible and an enforceable form. And we aren't there yet. There's a lot more negotiation over the next 10 days. I think it's as always with these big negotiations, what we don't know is what will happen when the leaders are in the room, because naturally people don't play all their cards before they get to the big game. They save their cards for the big game. But I am optimistic because we've seen some very good moves in the last few weeks. We now have nationally defined contributions, nationally determined contributions about carbon emissions, which are in a much better place now than they were even 6 to 8 months ago. We've seen announcements by China that it is going to stop funding coal-fired power outside China.
Okay.
We've seen great new announcements by the United States about its financing for climate. So I think we can see the elements beginning to come together. And obviously what we hope is that the fact that we've enabled all these world leaders to meet physically in Glasgow, despite the challenges of the pandemic.
So in terms of financing or in terms of receiving funds, what do you think the countries like Bangladesh, did they adequately financed or adequately funded with the promises or the pledges from the international community?
Well, I think Bangladesh is in a really interesting situation because obviously Bangladesh is a climate vulnerable country, but Bangladesh has a leadership role because the Honourable Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina is the chair of the Climate Vulnerable Forum, which brings together 48 climate vulnerable countries. And I think we are ensuring as COP presidency in Glasgow that those countries will have a really powerful voice in negotiations, because these countries did not cause the problem. They're the ones who are having to live with the most immediate consequences. And I think the moral force that they can bring to bear in the negotiations in Glasgow is going to be really important. The other thing I'd mention is that we as the UK have a very strong bilateral relationship with Bangladesh, and we are about to begin a really large climate programme of our own, which is part of our global climate finance commitment, but will enable us to work with the government of Bangladesh across effectively the four things I mentioned, across coal, cash, cars and trees here in Bangladesh, to help Bangladesh to make the transition that's needed in its own mitigation and adaptation strategies.
What kind of a strategic or action plan you're envisioning especially from UK?
Well, we announced this week our own climate action plan. So we're addressing, we already have made very significant progress with the way we generate power in the UK. So a generation ago, we were generating most of our power from coal-fired sources. We've almost eliminated coal from our power. We have a much bigger role for renewables, and we are looking at how we replace our current nuclear generation or nuclear power with a new generation there. But we have announced a package on transport. So we have announced an end date for the use of fossil fuel powered engines in our vehicle fleet. And we've also announced just this week a new package which will enable people who heat their homes with gas, which is most people in the UK, to move on to sustainable home heating via public grants. So there's a whole range of things that we're doing to make sure that we have our own house in order as the UK. And we hope that that will be a good platform for us to lead the world in putting these necessary adaptations into action.
So what plan you have for Bangladesh?
Well, with Bangladesh, what we're going to do is we're going to be working across adaptation and mitigation. So we're going to be doing more work on energy here because there has been very good move actually by the government here to reduce the role of coal in future energy generation. But there is more that can be done on a regional basis using hydro. There's more that can be done on renewables. I know it's not easy in Bangladesh given the topography, but there is plenty of scope for things like offshore wind, which we're going to help the government to explore. We will be looking at ways in which Bangladesh's considerable success in adaptation can be built on. And we'll be looking at ways in which civil society, these third sector groups who play a very important role in this field, can be further developed and empowered.
So renewable energy has a big prospect in Bangladesh, huh?
Well, I think it does. I mean, it's obviously harder in Bangladesh than in some other places because it's a very densely populated country and the topography doesn't lend itself to, in some ways, to some of the obvious forms of renewable energy elsewhere in the region. But if you look at the sort of wider region, there is definitely scope for regional trading of hydropower. So there is enormous hydropower potential in, for example, Bhutan and Nepal, and there is definitely scope for regional trading of hydro-generated energy across this part of South Asia. But there's also scope in Bangladesh's exclusive economic zone, now clearly demarcated in the Bay of Bengal, for much greater use of offshore wind, which is something where the UK has a global lead. And we will definitely be looking to work with the government to see if there's ways of generating more of Bangladesh's energy from offshore wind. It's also worth mentioning just briefly, there's some really interesting work being done in Bangladesh on solar energy, and the Duke of Cambridge, Prince William, has been sponsoring something called the Earthshot Prize.
Okay.
And I was very pleased that there's a Bangladeshi runner-up in the Earthshot Prize. So a company called Somoyer, who generate small-scale solar energy here in Bangladesh and enable it to be traded, was one of the runners-up in the Earthshot Prize. And I was very pleased to receive them in this global Earthshot Prize. So there's really interesting work going on in Bangladesh, and we're very pleased to be partners in it.
Coming back to the COP26 again, we have always been listening, previously, all the summits, climate-related summits, have given us a lot of hopes and a lot of promises and but do you think that these commitments, these pledges being implemented properly?
Well, I think they have to be. I think what we can see, if you look at what has happened since Paris was a breakthrough agreement, because Paris agreed on what needs to happen. But the thing about Glasgow is that needs to take us through the how. And I think the point is that everything that's happened since Paris has demonstrated that Paris was crucial. What we're seeing is more and more evidence of the damage that's being done by where we've already got to in the carbon emergency, and Glasgow is now doing the how we're going to do this at a time when it's really clear. The evidence is very clear all over the world that we have to do this. We have no alternative, and I think that means there's real urgency to this summit. And I think world leaders are going into it with a real sense that they owe it to the current and future generations to get this right, because we can now see the scale of disaster that's going to unfold if we don't.
Okay, let us ask you a few questions about bilateral relations, and we are expecting that Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina will be visiting UK, and she will also be attending some events including roadshow. What is, how do you view the visit of Prime Minister, and what are the programs and the outcome you are expecting from this visit?
Well, we're very pleased to have the Honourable Prime Minister in the UK. Obviously her attendance at COP is enormously important because of her role in the Climate Vulnerable Forum, her world leadership on that. But she's also going to be there as part of the roadshow, which the Bangladesh government is leading to try and encourage more foreign investment, or investment from the UK into Bangladesh, which I very much welcome, because I think there's obviously a huge national success in Bangladesh with the way that the economy has developed in the last, particularly over the last 15 or 20 years, and longer, going back to independence 50 years ago. But I think the point is that graduation, now due in 5 years' time in 2026, is in a way, it's a milestone, not a finishing line, and there will be a huge amount still to be done after graduation to develop Bangladesh as a middle-income country with the aim of becoming an advanced economy by 2041. And I think in all of that, private capital, private industry, private firms will have an enormously important role. And we already see the role that British companies are playing here in Bangladesh. We're the second largest cumulative investor in Bangladesh. And I think it's an excellent idea to be reaching out to the UK for more financial investment, more people who want to build factories potentially, particularly in special economic zones, people who can be providing services in Bangladesh, because the economy is going to need high value education, financial services, health services, and these are things that British companies are very good at doing. And the other thing I think is that, in a way, Bangladesh currently exports. We're the third largest export destination for Bangladesh. 85% of that is ready-made garments, which has been a huge success for Bangladesh. But I think in the next phase of economic development, it will be important to diversify. So you can see other industries in Bangladesh that already look very promising, with pharmaceuticals, bicycles. Sainsbury's, big UK supermarket, buys a lot of bicycles, and it's great to see that. And industries like leather, like ceramics. So I think what I hope will happen is that this roadshow will enable a range of buyers in the UK to see the range of things that can be produced in Bangladesh, and broaden their purchasing beyond what has already been a phenomenally successful ready-made garments industry, and be buying a wider range of things from Bangladesh, broaden the economic relationship in that way.
Honourable Ambassador, you were making very positive notes and painted a very positive picture about the growth and advancement of Bangladesh in many areas, and remarkably definitely, and no denying to that Bangladesh has made good progress in many areas. But I'm curious about to know that is there any setbacks or any difficulties the foreign investors are facing, which we need to overcome, which we need to successfully deal with in order to have more investment from the countries like UK?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always more that can be done, and I think if you look at the World Bank Ease of Doing Business rankings, Bangladesh could be higher. At the moment, Bangladesh is somewhere around 160th, and I think it would obviously be helpful to drawing in more investment if those rankings could be improved. So I think there are some issues around rule of law, contract enforcement, protection of intellectual property, and the ability of companies to engage quickly and efficiently with the regulators. Those are all issues on which more work could be done. Because I think what investors see is the scale of the Bangladesh market, the 8th largest country in the world by population, and they see the very rapid growth, 6 to 8% growth per year over the last sort of 15 or 20 years, and they're really impressed by that. And many companies want to come, and the companies that are here already do very good business. But I think it's fair to say that the more that can be done to address some of these ease of doing business.
But how do you see the pace of removing the impediments, the efforts?
Well, I think it would always be better to be faster, and I think the lived experience of companies is still that there are impediments to business, and if they were got rid of, that would be a good thing.
Okay.
So we always we talk a lot to the British business group here. We have a very active range of British businesses, and we talk a lot to the government. Including through a new trade dialogue that we've launched now that we are outside the European Union.
So can we say that we're in the process of making conducive environment to invite or
I think the environment is becoming more conducive, but I think it's always possible to do better in these areas, and we are having a very constructive dialogue with the government through our new trade dialogue about some of the market access barriers that we think it would be good if they could be tackled.
We know that strategic dialogue also held in UK, in London, last month.
Yeah.
So what was the outcome and what were the priorities you did discuss there?
Well, it was a really good discussion. We spent a day, and what it reflects, I think, is that we have a pretty sort of mature partnership with Bangladesh, where we have common interests across a wide range of things. We don't agree on everything, because you never do between friends, but we had really good discussions between very senior officials. My boss in the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office and his opposite number, the Honourable Foreign Secretary, had a really constructive day of discussions. And we really talked about 4 things. We talked about the bilateral relationship between our 2 countries, where there's many things happening, particularly in this 50th year, this celebratory year. We talked about regional security and some of the issues happening in the region, including the very tragic situation with the Rohingya refugees and what might happen there. We talked about defence. We've got a really interesting defence relationship with Bangladesh, including the first port visit by the Royal Navy in 13 years last week. Great to see HMS Kent alongside in Chattogram. I think lots of scope for our military to work closely together on training, doctrine, things like that.
Is that the part of any greater security strategic plan?
Well, I think it's that we are a broadly like-minded country. Both Bangladesh and the UK are supporters of the rules-based international system. We see the terrific support that Bangladesh gives to UN peacekeeping, and when you have broadly like-minded friends, then I think there's always scope to work together to make sure that our defence forces can cooperate in a sort of as partners in things like UN peacekeeping operations.
In the context of sailing to Bangladesh by the HMS Kent, how do you see the security concerns, global security concerns or regional security concerns that need to be addressed by the countries collectively?
Well, I think peace and security obviously is very important globally. We are very committed to the peace and security of the Indo-Pacific region. We published an integrated review of our overall global security policy in the early part of this year, and that identified the Indo-Pacific region as a region where, for demographic and economic reasons, this part of the world is increasingly important to us in the UK. We have just commissioned a new and very powerful aircraft carrier, the largest ship our Royal Navy has ever had, HMS Queen Elizabeth. And HMS Queen Elizabeth has spent the last several months transiting through the Indian Ocean, through the Mediterranean, the Indian Ocean, to the Western Pacific, where she has been exercising with friends, with the Japanese, with the Australians, with the New Zealanders, with the Koreans, with other countries. And on the way back, HMS Kent is part of the group that accompanies HMS Queen Elizabeth, and it was a very good opportunity for HMS Kent to come and pay a visit to our friends in the Bangladesh Navy and in Bangladesh by being the first Royal Navy ship into Chattogram for many years.
Yeah.
And they received a very warm welcome. It was an excellent visit. The sailors were very pleased to have the opportunity to visit Bangladesh. They had travelled non-stop from Guam in the Western Pacific to Chattogram because COVID has made it much harder for them to do traditional port visits.
I remember more than a decade back, HMS Bulwark,
Yes.
where the Royal Navy ship also
Yeah.
also came into
Yeah.
our sea, into
Yeah.
our water.
Well, I very much hope we have 2 new ships that are going to be based permanently in this part of the world, in the Indo-Pacific region. And I very much hope that they will be regular visitors to Bangladesh because we are, as I said, the Indo-Pacific region is now very important to us, and we are putting ships permanently stationed into the Indo-Pacific region rather than just passing through occasionally. So I very much hope that it'll be a much shorter time before we next have Royal Navy ships coming to Chattogram.
Yeah, part of our strategic dialogue, you mentioned that you discussed about the Rohingya crisis, and which is a huge burden for Bangladesh, and you all recognize that. But what is the way to end this crisis?
Well, the best way to end the crisis is for the Rohingyas to be able to return home to Rakhine as soon as they can do that in a way that is safe, dignified and voluntary. But obviously that is going to need some quite significant changes on the Myanmar side of the border. But we're very clear that repatriation is the right solution. It's not good for anyone to be sitting in a refugee camp. It's not good for the Rohingyas. It's not good for Bangladesh to have 1 million people in this very difficult environment in Cox's Bazar. So we're very clear that they should return, and we are working hard in the UN Security Council and elsewhere to enable them to do that. But we also think that while they are in Bangladesh, and realistically that may be for some time to come, it's important that the children are educated. There's thousands and thousands of children in those camps who need to be educated if they're going to have a future. And it's also important, I think, for the adults to have constructive things to do, whether it's volunteering to keep the camps clean and tidy, or being given skills, or being given the opportunity to earn a living. Because I think if people are left in idleness, then that is a terrible thing for them as people. But I also think it makes them more vulnerable to the temptations of criminality or radicalisation or whatever. So going home as soon as possible, but in the meantime being looked after in a way that means that they can live as constructive lives as you can in the very difficult conditions in a refugee camp.
Okay. We all know that you are expecting that Bangladesh will emerge as a very prosperous country, economically or on every sector. Especially you were talking about, we started with the climate summit, and Bangladesh is facing a lot of challenges and trying to overcome the adverse consequence of climate change. So definitely it's a big challenge. So apart from that, there are a lot of challenges. In your view, since 2019, you have faced and you have seen our country is try to overcome the impact of pandemic, COVID situation. So it has been eased somehow or other. Right now it's little bit comfortable. So what are the other challenges in your view Bangladesh need to overcome in the coming years?
Well, I think for Bangladesh, continued growth is obviously very important, and I think it's about creating the conditions for the economic conditions for continued growth. So that I think is about bringing private capital, private investors into Bangladesh. And I think the things they need to be confident, I think, as I was saying, some of the ease of doing business issues could be improved. It's very important that they can see that the rule of law is applied fairly, so that international investors don't find that the playing field is tilted in favour of their domestic competitors. And I think political stability is very important. And our view as the UK, all over the world, is that a democratic system which allows for free media, freedom of expression, free political association and free and fair elections, those are the best conditions anywhere in the world for both an economy and a society to continue to thrive.
Okay. Now how do you see the diaspora in the UK looking to Bangladesh and how they are willing to contribute for the betterment?
Well, the diaspora in Bangladesh, the British Bangladeshi diaspora are a very positive feature of our society. I mean, they're increasingly prosperous. They've been there for quite a long time. The earliest Bangladeshis, of course, came to the UK hundreds of years ago as Bengalis, because many Siletis actually were ship's cooks in the days when there was huge amounts of a big British merchant navy. The biggest part of the community arrived more recently, but they have really thrived and prospered, and they are very big. They're very hard working, And the other thing that they put a huge emphasis on is the education of their children. So what we're finding is that increasingly there are Bangladeshi professionals, lawyers, doctors. There are 4 British Bangladeshi members of our parliament, which is wonderful. There are British Bangladeshi members of the House of Lords, British Bangladeshi members of the House of Commons. So what we have in the UK is an increasingly confident, prosperous, articulate British Bangladeshi community who play a very strong role in supporting the bilateral relationship between the UK and Bangladesh, which is a very positive thing for me as High Commissioner when I'm looking at ways to promote the relationship between our 2 countries. The fact that there is a community with very strong roots at both ends of that is extremely positive.
In your stay when you were in Bangladesh, what moved you most? What impressed you most?
Well, I've been very impressed. I mean, I've really enjoyed my time in Bangladesh, and as I was saying to you before we started, I'm very pleased that I've extended my time here. So it's going to be a longer posting, not a shorter posting, because I think this is the most fascinating, vibrant, interesting country. To be posted to a country where things are really on the move, the economy is going well. I'm very impressed by the way Bangladesh and the economy have recovered from, or are recovering from, the COVID pandemic. You know, you look at economic growth here has been sustained right the way through the pandemic in a way that is really impressive. And you know, I think there will be challenges for Bangladesh as it goes through graduation and becomes a lower middle income country. But I think there's a real can-do spirit here, which I'm always impressed by. And as British High Commissioner, I like to think of myself as the conductor of the orchestra. We have this wonderful orchestra. So we have relationships on development, on trade, on defence, our diaspora relationships.
And cultural front also.
Cultural front. You know, there's a whole fantastic orchestra. And my job as the conductor is to sort of keep it all playing in the same tune. But it's a really interesting and really positive relationship in a part of the world which for us is really important. Indo-Pacific is where the global growth is taking place, and it's great to have a relationship with a fast-rising, large, important country like Bangladesh.
Thank you so much, High Commissioner Robert Dixon.
Thank you very much.
Joining us today.
Thank you. Great pleasure. Yeah.
Dear viewers, that's all my conversation with British High Commissioner to Bangladesh, Mr. Robert Chatterton Dixon, and we talked about the imminent forthcoming climate summit, which is being held in Glasgow, UK, and High Commissioner focused on the outcome, potential or prospective outcome of the summit, and how Bangladesh can deal with our climatic challenges, and how UK can help us and support us in dealing with this challenge. Apart from that, we talked about our bilateral relations, how UK is supporting us in economic development to ending Rohingya crisis, and it was a wonderful conversation, I would say. And thank you for watching this episode. We welcome you to watch our next episode. Until then, to take care and goodbye.